In the past, spirituality in general has been reasonably patriarchal, damn near void of any kind of explanation of how to do shadow work. It's crazy to me. I like challenging questions. If this is already the most important thing for you, then take it seriously.
How is your day going so far?
Good so far. Yeah, worked out. Took a friend to the airport, just doing a little work, but yeah, it's going well. Mhm. How about you?
Uh-huh. Yeah, good. It's the evening here.
Mm.
I'm in London. It's
Ah,
been quite rainy and grey, and yeah, and a lot of people I'm speaking with have a similar mood.
typical London winter, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
typical kind of February.
Mhm.
I don't think I was built for this. I was born in New Zealand, so
Oh,
something in me just expects February to be sunny and yeah. And when you say work, is this you're still working as a anesthetist?
yeah. I work as an anesthesiologist, but at night. Right now, I'm on nights, so yeah. When I'm on nights, I have plenty of time during the day to do other things if I didn't have a too rough of a night. But it varies. I work in a small hospital, so there are times when it's not very busy, and then there are times when we're very busy. So it varies quite a bit.
Well, um, my grandmother had this job back in, I guess, the 30s or something in New Zealand, and she picked it because she had six sons,
Mm.
and she, I understood at the time she could get up very early and be done by about lunchtime or something and be home, but I didn't know they would do. Is it emergency operations you're doing at night, or
Yeah.
who's
So at
going up?
night, I would do obstetrics, like putting in epidurals, doing C-sections, kind of emergency sections, and any kind of emergency surgery or trauma surgery. I'll take care of that at night.
Okay. I had a joke prepared where by day you put people to sleep, but by night you wake them up. But it sounds like it's the other way around.
Sometimes it is the other way around. Yeah. Yeah. I do days sometimes,
Okay.
but for the most of the year, I'm on nights. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Um, well, if it's okay, I'll dive into a bunch of questions about awakening and your experience. And
Sure.
uh, first of all, thank you so much for meeting me. Obviously, it's yeah, pleasure to cross paths with you. I've been involved in this inquiry, I guess, since 2017 in a serious way, although I'd done Vipassana retreats and other inquiry things beforehand. But that's when I discovered non-duality and Spira and those kind of pointings. But somehow I didn't come across your approach or your work or your videos until this year, and several friends started referring to you, and there's a community here in London. I don't know how aware you are of the little communities that are popping up inspired by your approach. And great group of people, very friendly, very welcoming,
Hmm. We actually have a
self-organizing.
community locator. Someone in my group or my community had a couple coders build a community locator. So literally anywhere you are in the world, you can get on there and find people who are interested in basically this topic in your area. So we've had some good sized groups pop up in the bigger cities, and even smaller areas have some groups. So it's kind of nice.
Amazing. Well, it seems to be working out here, at least in London. And
Awesome.
and they were saying you had a retreat here as well last year. Maybe you come once a year or something, I guess. And
Yeah, last year was the first, but we're coming again this year. We'll be doing it in August. So because of where we do it, it's a good venue. It's a big venue, but it's also a school. It's like a boarding school. So they don't have a lot of free weeks in the summer. Obviously in the winter there's none, but they don't have a lot of free weeks in the summer to do this kind of you know, rent the whole place out to somebody. So we'll probably be doing it in August every year.
mhm. And I understood over 300 people show up,
Last
which
year we had
is big.
30-ish,
30 people?
330, 330.
Oh, 330. Yeah. Uh, and I run some events, and I've run, as an organizer, little retreats here with, say, 30 people.
Mhm.
Seems to be a lot of work, and I'm just astonished that you're able to balance that with the amount of output that you do online and retreats and working as a medic in quite an intense job.
Keeps me on my toes. It's also effortless.
Really, that's your kind of felt experience? It's kind of just
My
that's what's
personal
flowing
experience
and
of it, my subjective experience, so to speak, is yeah, it's pretty effortless.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Uh, and is it okay? I've seen a few videos people ask you about the journey, but if it's okay, I'll just ask you, like literally, what's your present moment experience? Because I understood you went through a few different stages of awakening, and
Mhm.
maybe you're in one today that's different from yesterday. Who knows? What, is that an okay question to just check in with? How would you describe this moment?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
The simplest way is just to say that it's just sounds and sensations and visual experiences, but those experiences I'm talking about, those phenomena, so to speak, don't um don't exist in space in particular. Like they're not in an exact location. So they have like a kind of subjective experience of being everywhere. So sound is like intimate, meaning it feels like what if you perceive yourself as having a body and being local and being centered, there's a feeling to that. What it turns out is you can actually drop the feeling of being local, centered, and distinct totally. It can drop out completely. And the feeling of that being here is still there. The feeling, and I call it intimacy. So there's this feeling of just being home or intimate or simple or there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere you need to go. It feels very settled. That, if you can imagine, is completely intermixed or interpenetrated with the non-dualistic experience, which, as I said, non-dualistic just means it's not in space. It's not fixed in space. It's not in a distinct location. It's also not apart from anything else. So to say non-duality means objects separate from one another that somehow become merged is not right, actually. Non-duality is to see that there were never objects to begin with. There was never a subject and there were never objects. So if you can fathom that, that's the experience here.
Is
There's
it
no
close
also
to?
when you say your experience or like what's your subjective experience,
Mm,
I usually don't point this out to it depends. I might point this out to people depending on why they're asking. But in general, I'm not just going to say there is no personal experience. But since you're asking in this context, the sense of personality, the sense of not personality, the sense of individuality, the sense of being someone distinct and separate just doesn't, I can't find it. Like it's just not here. And when I say I can't find it, it sounds funny because there's no one that can't find it either. It's just not an issue anymore. There's no sense of looking for any distinct self. There's no sense of having to fix a self or restore a self or dissolve a self. None of that's there. It's just a moot point in a way. So
mm.
when you ask like what is your subjective experience, there's literally nowhere to look for that. There's no one to look. So it's something like the way the question's asked, although there is a sense of what you mean by it. So I can answer it in the first way I did, which is I can talk about the phenomenological experience or whatever. But
Yeah.
the subjective experience, and this is important with realization, the subjective experience itself falls out. So to try to answer a question like that, an analogy I might make is if I were to say to you, "How deep is that hole behind you?" and you turn around and there's no hole, it's just like a meaningless question. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Now, again, I don't just say that every time someone asks how I'm doing because then it just gets into an awkward conversation. But if I'm honest and I really try to look, so to speak, at what you're asking, there's nowhere to look and there's no one to do the looking. That's the simplest way to explain it.
So some people I've spoken with, uh, they'll say they'll have a sense of self, but they're seeing through that sense of self as a construct. So there's a sense of self, and they're seeing it's just another arising, maybe a collection of sensations and thoughts that coalesces around. Yeah, I know there's a sense of self, but it's seen through somehow. If I've understood your experience, so excuse the dualistic language, the experience that as it's showing up right now is there's no sense of self that is seen as a construct. There's just no sense of self. There's
Both,
I-ness in experience.
both. So
Have
I
I?
don't know the people you're referring to. I don't know what their subjective experience is. I have no idea. So
Sure,
I really don't know what they mean by
sure.
that. But the way you described it, it's like that there is a stage of things where you see through self in layers for sure. So the first layer, you could talk in terms of like Buddhist fetters or something like that. The first layer is like seeing that the construct of a separate self doesn't exist. And even though when that happens, it feels like a very big deal. It's a very big shift typically. It's an awakening shift or kensho. It's a big deal. It's rather life altering, and it's really a fundamental transformation in everything, in your experience of identity, your experience of reality. Um, and it's so profound in a sense that it could feel like that's it. There's like nothing more to see in a way, but that's not true. There's more actually to see. There's more that unfolds with this process. And so what can remain, or what does remain after that, is the sense of a subjectivity that is even a universal subjectivity, even a sense of a self that exists everywhere, or some very thin sense of a self, or that self as a construct can exist at all. That can remain and often does. Deeper realization will, at some point you will see through that. It's just not, there's no way to find it. It's like there's no one looking through the self, how'd you say, filter. The self filters thought. So someone could say, oh, I can see that that's not real. But I would say, well, who can see that that's not real, really? Like, really, is there someone at all? Is there the thinnest self of somebody who's like perceived to be looking through a filter of thought? Even that goes away. And it's actually thought. It is itself a thought, but it's not a conceptual thought. It's not a surface level thought that you can see as such. These become very, very subtle. They are functions in consciousness and the way consciousness interplays with sensation, essentially. And they do have a kind of karmic residue to them too. These are very subtle tendencies when you get into deeper insight. But I would say at some point, for many people I know, that total sense of self, like in any form, is just seen to be completely erroneous. It's just not there. Now, that doesn't mean that the filtering that the thoughts do isn't operating. It still is, but it's not operating for anyone, clearly.
Yeah. So there can be the thought of self, but it's seen to be just a thought.
Clearly. Any thought of self is a thought. Yeah. Any thought of anything is a thought, right? A self-thought's no different than a thought of an orange or an apple or the sky.
Yeah. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, so for a baby is probably, I mean, who knows for sure, right? But it's probably born without a super fixed sense of self or I and other or me and the world and whatever. And part of what comes along with that is it can't quite figure, like, it's not going to know where its mouth is and orient in space, and all those things are learned. And then as this self-thought is seen through or drops away, you don't miss your mouth when you're trying to lick an ice cream or whatever. That there's some processes that are continuing. So would you say that they've kind of, Nisargadatta said like a beautiful thing once of, oh, I've digested all that. It's in the same way that I'm not having to put any thought into digesting the lunch that I had earlier today. My stomach just had to do that without me thinking that I have to direct it in some way. Are you saying those processes kind of maybe drop into the subconscious and there's no meta-conscious awareness of selfing, or because you know which clothing is yours and which isn't, or do you know what I mean? Amongst the sea of phenomena that show up, there is the functioning of discerning between, oh, that's my wallet and that isn't my wallet. Is the question making any sense?
Yeah, I think it feels like you're asking a couple of different things, but to go back to the baby analogy, that's a really good analogy. When you say the baby doesn't know where its mouth is, it has to learn that. I would say that the baby actually finds its mouth before it knows anything about knowing where its mouth is. Knowing where its mouth is a whole other level of processing.
Yeah.
Yeah, babies can, before 18 months, babies function in pretty complex ways, including using words before they have a sense of I am. Before the self-sense appears at about 18 months old, they can have very complex.
Do they recognize themselves in mirrors as well?
Do they already have about 18 months, 16 to 20 months or so, around 18, pretty consistently. Yeah. So a 13-month-old can walk, speak, manipulate objects. It knows where its mouth is, but it doesn't know where its mouth is. It just finds its mouth, right, when it needs to. Yeah. That's very different. It's like saying, does a tree know where its leaves are? No, but it can move its leaves towards the sun, right? So we impute a lot onto what's just naturally happening with our sense of self. This is why it's really tricky to talk about no self, because it's so easy to backward extrapolate self onto things that has nothing to do with. You can function very, very easily without self-referencing at all in very complex ways. The human is complex. So I would say, if you want to talk about like from neurophysiological standpoint, the complex processes that our body minds learn do not require a conscious sense of I at all. A really good example is some of the, probably the most complex as far as processing is concerned, things we do are cerebellar. Cerebellar is like, say you're learning to play darts and you've never done it before. And at first you're terrible and you have to make micro adjustments until you get better, and it takes thousands of tries and you get better and better. But your mind is not actually thinking, okay, pinch a little harder, move to the left, throw it 5% harder. But those calculations are going on, right? This is not conscious at all. So movement is extremely fine-tuned. Movement of the eyes, similar with what we consider complex behaviors about choice and volition. At some point you see through all of that and you realize none of that was ever anything to do with a me or an I. Preferences, all of that is all imputed. It's all just, it's backward extrapolated and post-processed. That's what the self does. It's fascinating. It does it all day long. It contemplates this stuff. It believes it. It's just totally unnecessary. That's what it turns out to be, which is a huge relief.
Yeah. That's one of the languagings that I find confusing when teachers say, oh, that's what the self thinks, but in the same sentence maybe saying, but the self doesn't exist. So it can't be doing anything if it doesn't exist, right? It would be like saying a cartoon character is doing something. It's like, no, it's just a drawing on the screen. So when you say the self, what do you mean? Are you referring to a process in the mind, or like a phenomenological process?
An interaction of thoughts.
Combined with a belief that it has volition?
Totally. All of that's belief. The sense of being separate apart from other objects and being a subject center of everything, being the most important object in the room, a sense of volition, choice, all of that, all are rooted in this idea of self. It's an idea, but it's a complex set of ideas. So what it really ends up being is not nearly to the degree of what we would impute upon it of being effective in the world, moving around, manipulating objects. It's an internal world. It's just an internal world that's just spinning on itself all the time, saying, oh, I did this because of that, and I'm doing this, and I'm choosing this, and none of those are just thoughts. None of that's actually happening and never has been. Does that make sense?
I didn't say it makes sense, but I'm more or less, I'm following you in a way. I'm not entirely sure it's what you mean.
Yeah.
But it landed somewhere.
Okay.
But again, I just wanted to come back to that baby thing.
Yeah.
If the baby learns to recognize itself in the mirror, is there some selfing happening there, do you think? And could that, because clearly you're still recognizing, you know which picture's yours on the screen if you can see us both. You know, if there was a dot on one of our heads, you'd be like, yeah, that's on Angelo's head. It's not on Amir's head. There's a self-recognition happening without there being a sense of self. Maybe I'll combine it with another question. So do phenomena show up in 2D for you? Is that part of the
more like it's more like non-dimensional? That's the best way I can explain it. Now, there are times when people will do certain kinds of contemplations, specifically a contemplation into the nature of the subject-object relationship. Subject-object simply means me, whatever feels like you, your center, your processing inner world, whatever it is, your location, and everything out there, right? You can contemplate that as a psychological overlay, essentially, or a functional mental overlay. And at some point, for many people, it will drop. You'll see like there actually was never an inside and outside, very clearly. Often for them, they will experience 2D. Like you'll see the visual field as it's actually seen, which is literally two-dimensional. But that's usually temporary. You don't usually continue to see it that way. It kind of evolves beyond that, especially with formless non-duality, where not only do you see there's no boundary, there's also no form, which are two different things for sure. Formless non-duality is a very, very profound, stable experience in the sense that there's no sense of form anymore at all. That you see that their form itself was also a thought. This is deep realization, but it's achievable in a sense. It's not achievable by somebody, but it's something that it is a fruition of practice or a fruition of insight, a fruition of inquiry.
How recent is this in your trajectory or narrative?
27 years ago.
Did you go through some time of like 2D-ness and
No,
whatever?
this was like 27 years ago. So it's a little hard
Oh,
for me to
okay.
remember the exact details, but there are parts of it that are still very clear about like how this unfolded and how this unpacked. But I will also say to anyone listening, how it happened to me, and I'm happy to talk about it, is different than how it'll happen for you, how it'll happen for that person, how it happened for this person. I find this happens so differently for people, at least in the way narratives are constructed, talking about it.
Mm.
Also, the order in which certain perceptual filters fall, it does change. It's not always like the Fetter model of like, it always goes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's not quite like that. So I do want to tell anybody who's watching, like, hold lightly any description I give, because it's not about it's not about turning your experience into my description. That's not how awakening works. That's not how realization works. It works by becoming really, really curious, and you're curious, like the questions you're asking are great, and then finding a way to turn that curiosity inward and going, well, wait a minute.
Mm.
Why do I actually feel like I have a sense of subject apart from an array of objects around me? Where is that real? Like, is that thought, or is that something I can actually find? Right. Um, the other thing I thought of is just
Yeah,
saying,
well,
go ahead.
I'll go for it. Yeah. No, you go for it.
The thing I thought to say also about the self sense, another description I can give, and this is again deeper realization, when the subtle self sense starts dropping away or does drop away, many people will describe it as your inner world disappears. The sense of having an inner world where you like escape from reality in a way, like you pull back and think and contemplate and actually feel apart from the flow of experience, that goes away. So you just kind of just become everything in a way. It's like there's no way to dissociate from it really anymore. There's no way to make distance from anything. There's no way to just be a distinct one anymore. That's how I might also say it, just as a different way that it could hit.
So it's definitely some of what you're saying feels above my pay grade, but I'll keep going as best I can. Um, I have a friend who's, I'd be interested in your comment on this. I have a friend who had an awakening a few months ago, and the world now shows up in 2D for her. And I was curious about that because my understanding is, yeah, we all see in 2D, and there's some kind of illusion that happens because we're seeing 2D pictures that the brain kind of overlays and gives this illusion of depth. But the illusion does have some, let's say, validity or practical use, because I can reach out to an object and more or less accurately pick up that object without missing it. Whereas if someone loses an eye and really is only getting a 2D image, they might sometimes miss the object. They might overreach or underreach. The brain, for want of a better word, or whatever processing is happening, is no longer receiving that data that allows them to construct some kind of depth perception. And I think the same thing happens with the ears. Like sound hits one ear a millisecond before the other ear, and that allows us to orient towards the direction the sound is coming from. So there's an illusion of sound being located in space, which allows me to turn my head in that direction. And if I was to lose hearing in one ear, that would become a struggle. Now, if I've understood, well, for her, what I was interested with her is when I asked, although the world shows up in 2D, she doesn't struggle with grasping objects. So it's like that process is still happening, but reality shows up as if on a screen. The reason I asked you when you had this experience, because I was curious to compare it with yours, but maybe it was too long ago for you to remember. I don't know if you can replicate or even have a theory on that. So it seems to me that maybe some of that processing has dropped into the subconscious, but there is still a creation of the illusion of depth, or the calculation of relative depth from the body so that she can grasp objects. Is any of this making sense? Just to check that I.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole
Yeah.
the whole thing about like, okay, grabbing objects and so forth and manipulating your environment and moving through the environment. It's like, okay, when you think about it, like you're thinking about it right now. Now we have to talk about it in terms of thoughts. When you talk
Yeah.
about things in terms of thoughts, you're going to talk about you almost have to talk about it in terms of self. because thought is self-based. Thought is
Yeah.
about time, space, doership, agency. So you're kind of already in that world. But it turns out
Yeah.
that what we call the environment, what we call the self, and what we call reaching and manipulating and all that, you can experience that without any of that happening. It's just like a self-responsive environment that's zero distance, boundless, and it's interpenetrated. I don't know if you can imagine that, but that's actually what it turns out to be. So it's totally effortless. There's no distance. There's nowhere to reach. There's no one to reach. There's no before and after, behind and front decision to be made. It's just happening. It's totally effortless. So I just want to be clear that that's what's experienced, even though even experienced is saying too much because there's no one apart from it to experience it. But that's the appearance, or that's the appearance is the best word, I suppose, because it doesn't, I can't even impute real or unreal onto it. It's just this. But it's also not dissociated, distant, nihilistic, or black or empty or something like in the way the mind would think about it. It's very alive and responsive, but it's in a sense self-responsive because it doesn't have parts. It doesn't have an outside or an inside. It doesn't, it's not even an it. It's more like energy or something, right? So that's the actual experience. So if you back out of it and say, well, now let's talk about, well, how do you manipulate it? Well, you're already assuming there's a you doing it. And when you talk about manipulation, you're already assuming dualistic experience that you don't find in direct experience. So yeah, I can talk about those things, but we're already talking in terms of thought, and thought is always going to be dualistic. So I just want to be clear on that distinction. It's really important. So your friend, for instance, she's not walking around going, oh, how do I move my hand and reach it? She's just doing it. It's just hand reaches, object moves, it's something like, say, if I'm cooking noodles, it's like the noodles are cooking themselves. It's just happening. It's like so straightforward and simple and innocent and experientially interpenetrated, meaning there's not a partness that has to be navigated, and there's not a gap in space that has to be bridged to interact with another object. And none of that seems to be happening at all. So once we start talking about it in terms of, well, how does this work? How does that happen? And all of it, we can do that, but just understand that's not the direct experience. That's a thought experience. This is what I was saying before, where the self structure is so, the sense of the self, that subtle self sense is so pervasive in thought only that it really does. It imputes itself on so many things that it can be really surprising what actually goes when that goes. How much actually goes with it can be very surprising. So practically speaking, as far as the two-dimensional experience, I have worked with many people who have had that for a period of time. And I think if your friend, it'll probably go away with some time. It'll kind of morph into something else. And most people do okay with it, but I have had people say they've like bumped into things or have trouble like parking their car close to something because they tend to like have judge distance, differently for a short period of time. Usually they're safe, but we tell them like, be careful, like pay extra attention. Don't distract yourself on your phone or something when you're driving, like just because it's an adjustment period for sure. So I guess the broader statement I would make about that for anyone listening is just beware that when you go through, especially these deeper insights, these deeper realization stages, it's not changing your perception of I or your perception of time and space conceptually. It's changing the way the physical world experiences itself, or the way you experience it at first, and then it's more like it's experiencing itself. That's a very profound shift. It's a functionally profound shift. There can be adjustments that are needed. For instance, formless non-duality takes some getting used to, because your experience of time and space are just obliterated. There's this, so you will learn to like write things down, set alarms, like make sure, because 1 minute and 10 days, 2 weeks, 5 months, like all of those can be experienced very much the same. Eternity, the term eternity meaning not subject to time and space, is exactly the experience, and it's timeless. So time gets very weird. So there are practical measures that we take generally as we move through these, and you'll get used to it. Like you can get used to anything, but it's still, for me, there are times when like, okay, if I'm driving in a place that I'm unfamiliar with, especially at night, I really have to focus, because the sense of distance and objects being solid and all that, it's not actually there. So I really have to focus because yeah, of course there are the sort of thought-based perceptual filters that can be utilized in a certain way. It's hard to talk about this, but and yet the car that's 100 feet in that direction and the car that's 10 feet in this direction and my chest and my hands and the steering wheel, they're all actually the same. So in certain settings, if they're really complex, especially visually, like slightly chaotic, I'm actually really careful. And I've just learned this over the years. I haven't had any like accidents because of this or anything, but it does compel you to take certain measures to adjust because these are adjustments. These are definitely adjustments you'll make in your life.
Are you familiar with the whole narrative around predictive processing and active inference and how the brain or perception builds up a model of the world, which is a construct? Is that
I haven't
stuff
heard
that's
those
familiar
terms
to
you're
you?
using specifically.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I'd love for you to look into it if you had the inclination at some point, especially with your direct experience of formless non-duality combined with your background as a medic
Mhm.
and I guess a scientist in in that way. Um, but they've been partly because it's not my area of expertise, but my understanding is a lot of it got moved forward because they're trying to figure out how to teach AI systems to perceive things, to perceive faces, to distinguish um, data streams that are coming in, and at the same time looking at the neuroscience of how perception functions. I'm going to garble this, but it looks like what happens is that the first thing that is perceived is, um, let's say, just edges and shades, and then they're built up into whatever, like little shapes, and it's hierarchical.
Mhm.
And the hierarchy is based on what's in that terminology are called priors, basically beliefs or expectations
Mhm.
about what is out there, which if we could actually see, we wouldn't be able to make heads or tails of it because the data coming in is so chaotic. Apparent, if you stick your thumb out and look at fingernail, that's all that we can actually see in color. The rest of the image is a total construct of the mind based on its best guess as to what's out there and what it's seen before, et cetera, whatever. And there's different hierarchies of priors, one which, the top one being I'm a self, separate from the world or whatever.
Mhm.
And then lower level ones like light sources are generally from above, which is how optical illusions work. Because if
Mhm.
you construct an image where the light source is from below, it's like the mind can't make sense of it and it'll construct some kind of image that doesn't make sense. So that, yeah, I can't really present it to you any better than that, but I've been curious as to the parallels between what happens in awakening and when some of that's seen through and when the constructed nature of perception is seen through, including the construction of the self, of our emotions and the sense of distance. And all this stuff is apparently in the most modern neuroscience acknowledged as construction. It's kind of made up.
Yeah.
And what meditation or some versions of awakening might be is seeing through that as all a construction, but without the construction necessarily disappearing in the same way that I've kind of got an illusion of speaking to someone, but I can draw it back and realize, like, well, it's pixels on a screen and sound coming out of my speaker. And, you know, I'm imagining there's someone, and I hope that there really is someone on the other end of, or for example, I could wake up in 5 minutes and like, oh, I haven't had this conversation yet. It was all just a dream.
Mhm.
These are all images showing up in mind in some way. So I've garbled for long enough that I can't remember my question or why I was saying all this, but perhaps you have a response
Sure.
to
Yeah.
of that.
Sometimes I love it when like science or I guess what is this like neuro AI science or
Neuroscience and
something trying to figure out
perception.
how
Yeah,
consciousness
yeah.
functions, and they hit on something
Mm,
that was described like 5,000 or like not 2,500 years ago.
mm,
So there's something called the five aggregates in Buddhism. This is in the Pali Canon. It's in it's 2,500 years ago, but the Heart Sutra, which probably was 300 CE or something, I'm not sure. Have you heard of the Heart Sutra?
yeah.
Okay, the Heart Sutra talks about the
Yeah.
five skandhas or the five aggregates. The five aggregates are exactly what you were talking about. First aggregate is form meaning what we consider to be physical world, what we consider to be this, what we consider to be form. in a pretty literal way. The second skandha is what we would call our reaction to a specific stimulus. So it's something like favorable, unfavorable, or neutral. The third one is actually label, like, oh, that's light, that's an edge, that's hair, that's a person. And then the fourth one is mental constructs or that mental fabrications, essentially. And that's when we plug that into the whole narrative of what else seems to be happening and also give it volition largely. So it's feelings, perceptions, impulses. And the last one is consciousness. So consciousness is kind of like how it's all experienced together in what we pretty commonly connote as consciousness, at least in sort of spiritual circles or certainly circles about awakening. So all of those aspects in the Heart Sutra, as it describes, they're all empty. It turns out they're all empty. And non-dual, seeing the emptiness of form is non-duality. That is literally what non-dual is experienced as, not two. The deeper end of that pool is formlessness. And what happens is, and this is exactly right, these aggregates are exactly right. So in the Heart Sutra, it says the Bodhisattva of compassion from the depths of prajna wisdom saw the emptiness of all five skandhas and sundered the bonds that create suffering. So seeing that all of those are empty individually, that is the end of suffering. And I totally agree with that, 100%. It's exactly like that. So to answer your question in a practical way, in the way you asked it, I find that stuff fascinating. I find neuroscience fascinating. I find like science trying to understand consciousness fascinating, although they stumble a lot, and they're trying to catch up. Without awakening, it's very difficult, very, very difficult. But I'm fascinated with it. I'm fascinated with evolutionary psychology, all these things that go into like what makes us up. However, what I want to point out in regard to your question, all of those, what I would call the aggregates, or what you might call, I can't remember the terms you use, but those components of the way consciousness forms thoughts and beliefs to create what we call a world around us and our interaction in the world and action and interaction and relationship, all of that is thought. All of that is thought. That's all it is. It's all thought. It's imputed by the consciousnness, essentially, right? When you see through that.
Are you distinguishing thought and like the experience of color, for example? Or are you saying, are you saying in terms of like it's all mind? It's all in the same way if I was having a dream,
Yeah.
if I was lucid dreaming, I'd be like, well, there's no actual beach there. There's the thought of a beach that shows up as colors and shapes and sounds, but there's nothing behind it, as it were. There's no depth to it. Is that what you mean by thought? Or are you talking to a particular category of our phenomena that's like, that's thought, and then there's reality, for want of a better word?
Yeah, I will make that distinction that what thought is trying to refer to, what thought is trying to construct into a usable paradigm, let's say, and does a good job of it, it can be experienced directly. That's what's seen after non-dual and no self-realization, specifically no self-realization, is to experience the unconditioned directly. It's a trip. It's a trip. Because when you say red, you can't even call it red without putting a label on it. You're already labeling it. But there is something there that's experienced, but it's not a thing and it's not out there, but there's something that's experienced. So if you can see how quickly the mind starts labeling things and putting layers on, you can see how subtle this gets and how tricky the inquiries can be. And yet you can actually see through it. And you can live in a world where all of those perceptual filters are seen to be empty, and you can directly experience what is there without those perceptual filters. And you can experience the perceptual filters just fine. They're not a problem. And there's no one's experiencing that. That's kind of the hard part that I kind of have to throw in, but it's very clear that that's what's not there. There's not someone that keeps owning that experience, that keeps owning the perceptual filters, or even the one that keeps trying to dissolve the perceptual filters. That whole endeavor goes down the drain. Like the whole spiritual endeavor goes down the drain as well. It's another important point of this. That can also surprise people a lot. Some people not so much. Some people it's really hard to let go of that. It's really hard to let go of the whole
spiritual endeavor.
However that feels to you, because it feels so intimate. Like some people, it's like my idea of God. It's like it was so precious. Like my relief from the suffering. My whole life has been driven by this seeking, this spiritual, endeavor, this process. But the process, like that Ouroboros snake, it will eat itself. The process will ultimately undermine itself, and that's great. That's how it needs to go. So there is that as well, that component, that this goes so far that it takes everything. It takes the one who wanted to win the spiritual lottery, takes that person out too.
Mm.
But it's totally natural on the other side of that, and it's okay.
So here's where I can follow you. I think that there's a whole bunch of phenomena showing up. I've got a vague sense of a me being over here. If I examine it, I can't find it. I can find a
Mm.
bunch of sensations that feels more intimate than, let's say, the table or whatever. I can imagine, based on previous inquiries, that if I really keep looking at it, I'll see it as not me or not mine. And I can imagine doing that for long enough where something just kind of clicks and it's automatic and like, oh, there's just more sensations, but there is no me or mine or someone to even say that.
Mhm.
So feel free to comment on that. But what I struggle with is when you say formless, I'm like, I could get how all this could be showing up much like a lucid dream. It's clearly a kind of shimmering, moving, never-ending display, but it still has form. It still has a left and a right, a differentiation that the computer screen still has edges or whatever. So I'm totally bewildered. I might not have understood the first no self thing, so you can feel free to kind of correct me on that. But when you say formless, yeah, I'm totally bewildered by what that could even
Sure. Just
mean
just replace
while still
yourself.
being
Like,
able to drive.
if we were to pluck you out of that screen and put a baby there, does the baby see computer screen edges? What does the baby actually see? Does the baby see edges, distance? It doesn't.
No, but the baby can't function, whereas you can. You
Babies
can
function.
like,
Babies function. And like I said, even at a year old, it can reach out. It can interact with something that's in front of it, conventionally speaking.
well, I'd argue, yeah, they're seeing faces, they're doing face recognition, they're like, they know
But
when
is
it's
it
like a
seeing
smiling
faces?
face. Not,
Is it actually seeing a face?
obviously, I don't know, but I'm imagining, yeah, like, well, not in the first few weeks, and then eventually the brain kind of starts to form these priors of faces and starts to recognize faces. So I would assume so, but obviously I
So
can't know for sure.
before it has the word face, before it knows the word face, does it see a face?
No, obviously I could hear a word that I've never heard, and I'd be like, okay, there's phenomena, there's sound, but I don't know what that word is.
Yeah, good.
So yeah, it
It would
wouldn't
be
have a label.
that's a good way to contemplate what you're talking about. So the important key is that I can't explain this to you, but I can show you how
Mm.
to figure it out for yourself. So these
Yeah.
questions are things to like get you curious in a direct way. Another way would be if I suddenly gave you a sixth sense you never had before, like sonar.
Mm.
You could probably pretty quickly figure out like that sonar is bouncing off of something that must be an object and so forth. But at first you wouldn't have, it would just feel like this sensory like experience. You wouldn't even know it's like about the outside world or the inside world, especially if I didn't tell you what it was. If you just suddenly had a new sense, right? Does that make sense?
Mm.
It would be
I
very
think so.
challenging to even know like, oh yeah. So at some point you actually learn, well, first, way before your mind learns that you are the one that's doing it, your body learns to interact in that environment, right? That happens early on. Like we physically and physiologically adapt to things. Much later, we will adapt to the point of actually extrapolating a self onto it. Here's an example I'll give you that helps to understand this. That's very like neurophysiology. You ever heard of the Iowa gambling test? Okay, very
No.
simple. The Iowa gambling test is basically you take participants and you give them two decks of cards. One is red, one is blue. Okay, and the cards are face down. They don't know what's on the cards before they turn a card over, and you tell them you have $50 to start or 50 pounds or whatever. That's your bank. You turn over one card, and if it says 20 pounds, now you have 70 pounds. If you turn over another card, it says minus 10, now you have 60 pounds. And you can turn over whichever color you want. You can turn red or blue, it doesn't matter, and just keep turning over those cards, right? That's all the instructions they get. They have no idea what's on the cards. And so they just start turning the cards over, right? And there's numbers, 50, 40, minus 30, minus 20. And the secret in the study is that one deck of cards is actually stacked such that it's richer. So it's going to give you more money, right? They both have pluses and minuses, but just in general, one's a little bit more rich. Not super obvious, but it takes, so that takes like a little while to figure it out. And so here's what they find consistently. Within about 10 to 15 cards being flipped, when they start to flip the card with the lower, that's less rich, with like less money, they start to have like an increase in epinephrine, increase in heart rate. They start to have a sympathetic response, like a stress response to grabbing the wrong card. So physiologically, at the kind of almost reptilian brain, they already know, something knows. But it's not until about like 25 to 30 cards that they actually start changing their behavior. So first, the physiologically knows, then the behavior changes. So like say 25 cards in, then they actually start purposely picking more of the red deck. Let's say the red deck's the rich deck. But the funny part, and this is the fascinating part, it's not until like 35 to 40 cards that they consciously process, oh, I'm picking the red deck because the red deck is richer. And actually, they're usually proud of it. They're like, I just figured this out. They didn't just figure it out. The body knew, and then the behavior changed. And then way later, they imputed the self onto it in volition. So to me, that's one of the best simple neurophysiologic studies that essentially says what I'm saying. There's been other studies that kind of deconstruct the idea of decision being a conscious thing in the way we think it is and all of that. But that's kind of helpful maybe in some sense, that your body and the responsiveness of the environment and all that, it happens so unconsciously. It happens so often long before we pat ourselves on the head and say, I made a decision. So there's that.
I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert in anything actually, but where I can imagine the conscious thought being useful is I've just gone in to play that game. My physiology has figured out this thing way before my conscious mind did, but then I can go out and like, you're about to go in and like, hey, Angelo, I think you should really go for the red the red deck. And then you can skip that whole thing because someone's been able to consciously understand it, communicate it in language. You're able to absorb it and kind of do a top-down thing, which would allow us historically a much greater degree of cooperation as a tribe to, like that's basically how humans have developed their civilization, of being able to construct conceptualizations of what's going on and communicate them. I'm saying all this without being an expert in any of those fields.
You're very perceptive.
One of the things
that's I want to make a point about that is like that there are sociologists who believe volition, agency, is not even a personal experience, it's a collective experience. That it's possible that the whole reason we have language at all and that we have thought at all is exactly what you said, is for cooperation, right? It's one of the things that we do very different than other species, essentially. One of the handful of things that make us stand out in a certain way. So I would agree that I wouldn't say there's no use for language. There's definitely a use for language. And thought is tied to language. And I would say thought is actually almost like an inward reflection of language. So thought, in a sense, to me, is a side effect of language. But what you're saying is accurate, I think. And I think it's been shown, like at least in sociology circles and so forth, that collective interresponsiveness has value through language allows that to occur. Whereas without language, we could probably signal in other ways. Certainly other animals signal in other ways. Birds change direction suddenly. They entrain. They don't need to say, hey, I got an idea. Let's change direction. It's like 1,000 birds change direction suddenly and all that. So there are other ways to entrain other than language, but certainly we can entrain in very complex ways in planning and so forth.
Yeah, with much more flexibility, which I think can segue us to the reason I originally reached out to you, although we've gone down this amazing rabbit hole, which I'd love to keep exploring because I find it fascinating, which is basically I've been involved in these communities and scenes and inquiries for a long time, in a way, because I was brought up my whole life in a way because I was brought up in various religions, and so those had a spiritual inclination as to what is true and what is meaningful and what is reality and what is beyond just our basic assumptions about life. But in the non-dual communities, let's say, for the last 7 years, and the awakening shows up for individuals and communities, it seems, with varying degrees of functionality or reduced suffering, or even today some news came out which you might have heard around, but it doesn't matter because it could happen in any week or month, where teachers who people look up to and maybe get a lot out of their teachings have also been involved in behavior that seems immoral or unethical. Um, and so one of the inquiries I have is how can people get the most out of these awakening trajectories without throwing out any babies with the bathwater of thought? And it occurred to me that maybe ethics, like nature in and of itself, seems to be pretty amoral, is incredibly barbaric. Consumption between insects and animals, and sickness, old age, death. It all just is part of what's happening, and it does involve at least pain, if not psychological suffering. I'd imagine. And again, you're an anesthesiologist, so you'll know way more about this than me. Um, but I do wonder if some level of thought and reflection is required to develop ethical behavior and just theory of mind. Well, I really, something in me reacts negatively when this happens to me. So let me use my imagination and feel empathy, compassion for the other. And let's try to figure out how to develop communities and societies where there's less harm being enacted. Because I'm sure you've witnessed times where uh, people either have genuinely fallen back onto, well, it's all just happening and there's no one here doing it, or maybe they've cynically used that as a kind of get out of jail free card. And I'm gonna, whatever it is, sleep with my students, take all their money. Well, the the kind of not great things that happen. So do you have some thought? Because yeah, that was the original reason one of the things that inspired me when I looked at your work is that you really emphasize shadow work, and this recognition that um, maybe there's some myths in awakening circles where you just wake up and like everything, all your trauma just disappears, but maybe some more intentional um, looking at that is required. And I'm curious about the shadows also in communities, and especially communities involved in awakening. So that's a big chunk of a question. Feel free to take your time
No
to
worries.
to
I
respond.
like it. I'm glad we circled back to shadow work. The questions you've been asking are very insight based, and we started with my own experience with insight. So we've been just talking about direct insight. But I would say I would be completely um, derelict in my duty to talk about awakening or realization without talking about shadow work, and which I do all the time. When I'm
Mm.
working with people one on one or in groups or whatever, I probably do shadow work with them more than I do insight work. Probably, I would say, just time wise, the amount of time and effort I spend. And I'm fine with that. To me, they're not really distinct
And maybe
necessarily.
for anyone listening who doesn't know what we mean by shadow work, do you mean dealing with psychological or emotional material that
Yeah.
comes up? Is that what
Yep.
you mean by shadow? Yeah.
Yep. Repressed emotions, trauma, all of it. Dissociation in every form, many forms of dissociation, which mind identification itself is a form of dissociation by the way, but there are more pathologic forms and so forth. But yeah, all of that, and it's a broad topic, and we can talk about it too at some point or whatever you want. But so yeah, it is definitely part of this. Now, I can make a pretty broad generalization. Yeah, that in the past, spirituality in general, as we know it, has been reasonably patriarchal. It's been completely, if not completely, damn near void of any kind of explanation of how to do shadow work. It's crazy to me. Like it's amazing to me. I'm talking Zen, Dzogchen, um, Theravadan Buddhism, just Hinduism, like so much of that. And there are some subsegments of these things that do delve into shadow work, and so forth. I can't say it's like 100%, but it's notably absent in my experience. So,
Mm.
so what to do about that? Well, oh, and also I should say, when does shadow work come in with all of this? Whenever it needs to. Whenever it needs to. There's no exact right time. If you feel like doing shadow work, do shadow work. If something's coming up, address it. Don't run from it. Don't spiritualize yourself mentally out of it because that'll just be thoughts anyway. Face it. See what's going on there. Inquire. Feel it. Whatever you need to do. Find a relational sort of matrix or circle or group that can help you work with that. Find a trauma therapist. Like I recommend all this stuff to people. Many modalities, and there are more and more now, which is actually great. I think the secular world is actually coming up, really showing up for this, for the shadow work aspect of it. And I'm trying to fuse the two together in some way, at least in my groups and my retreats. But and I can talk about what I think some of the most potent kind of shadow work is too, if you want. But I will say this: when you've had a shift in identity, when you've had an awakening, in Zen it would be called Kensho. It's a very specific thing. It's a true transformation at the identity level. Most people would call that awakening. Maybe you would call it stream entry, depending on your beliefs and whether you're Buddhist oriented or whatever it is. You can't not do shadow work after that. If someone tells you they've not done any shadow work or they've never had to do shadow work, I don't even know what to make of that. Either they're just sugarcoating it and they don't want to scare you and they have done a lot of shadow work, or they're really avoiding it or they're dissociating from it. But I know people in all walks of life, high functioning people, low functioning people, emotionally traumatized people, people who grew up in families where they weren't emotionally traumatized, men, women, old, young, like every walk of life, and they all have to do shadow work and deeper realization. So it's going to come for you. And my advice is face it, be willing to do it. It's not going to be comfortable, of course, especially at first, but you'll realize why you're doing it. And if you have had an awakening, if you've had an insight, you've had a shift, if you've been watching Neo Advaita non-duality and it's like, oh, I see that there's no seeking anymore, there's no sense of seeker and all that. But if in your heart of hearts you feel like something is not completed, something is still not quite done, you suffer, you react, you get pissed off at people and lose it, and you just tell yourself, well, that's just what's happening. Like, do some shadow work because there are deeper insights that you may be totally not even recognizing are available, including non-dual. This really connects in with non-dual because when you start dissolving perceptual filters and boundaries completely, when there's no sense of separation anywhere, it's also very hard to hide your own trauma from yourself or anyone else. And I mean that very literally. It comes up into consciousness. Like you will feel what you thought you had gotten rid of, what you thought you had so repressed that you never had to worry about again. And it's there and you can't avoid it because you can't avoid anything anymore. So yeah, trauma work, shadow work comes up in spades in deeper realization. And so what I've recommend anything, like the way I talk about any of this stuff, I don't say I'm the best teacher. I don't say, I have the best method. I don't say I know the best shadow work. I say, do what works for you. If Rupert Spira works for you, go to Rupert Spira. If Eckhart Tolle works for you, great, do that. There are many good teachers out there and different kinds of pointings, processes, retreats, whatever. Dzogchen, if that's working for you, do it. And I kind of say the same thing about shadow work. Like there's PSIP, there's EMDR, there's, TRE, there's trauma therapists of all kinds, somatic experiencing. The best thing I found is Inside Circle. The best thing I found is it's basically a circling or deep shadow process that Inside Circle developed. It's not normal, like authentic relating type of circling that people often are familiar with. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just very different. It's a curated process. There's a strong role of facilitation in it, and the kind of elders that facilitate are very, very experienced in this. And it can be very intense. It can be surprising. It can be gritty, but it works. It works really well. And I've seen people get through traumas that they haven't been able to address in years or even decades of therapy in a pretty short time. So that's what I've learned I've learned that facilitation process. I do that in small groups with people. We have a group and we do it for 3 days and we're doing circling every day. I don't talk about non-duality. I don't let anybody tell me, oh, there's no one here to feel. Like none of that even comes up. We don't talk about insight. It's not about that. It's about your human experience, right? That's what shadow work is. So it becomes indispensable, actually, shadow work in this process. So I'm really glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and it's also where it kind of gets confusing, because on the one hand, experience shows up as this undifferentiated, formless, unconditioned arising, and there's also an acknowledgement of what you call a human experience. And I don't know, so like, are there what I would call emotions showing up in, again, I don't know how to language the words, questions without some dualism, in your experience, or, is there still shadow material that might come up for you that you will deal with? I don't know what you can say. What could you say about the apparent disparity between these two aspects of experience you're describing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've been inclined to point this out as we were having this whole conversation and the way you asked the questions about, like, is it this or is it this? Like that kind of dualistic, like, but what about this? Is it like this or is it like that? There's this really beautiful principle called the two truths doctrine. You ever heard of this?
Yeah, I kind of
Okay.
hate it.
I know, I bet you do.
Because I'm like, if there's an ultimate truth, it's not ultimate if there's two of them. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like,
Yeah.
wait,
Let me
either
see.
it's ultimate or it's not.
Well, that's the thing is like it's either this or this. That belief itself, that is a belief. It's a belief that says it's either this or this. That's a belief.
I know, but it's not me claiming one. Like, to call it ultimate, it's not ultimate if it excludes anything. Do you know what I mean? So to say, oh, there's the ultimate truth and there's the relative truth, it's like, well, it's not ultimate if it's excluding something. So just maybe I get too kind of
Yeah, they
caught
would
up in the
describe more
precision
like
of the language.
absolute truth, like absolute and relative.
Right, but absolute has to include everything, or it's not absolute.
Oh, for
That's
sure,
why. That's why.
100%. You're right about that. You got that part totally right.
Yeah. So
It
unless it
includes everything. If it
includes
includes everything, you
relative,
can't even have things in it, right? There's not even things.
yeah. So don't call it absolute if it doesn't include the relative. If there is such a thing that
Oh, it
we can
includes the
even describe
relative.
as relative.
It does include the relative because it's
So then there's
everything.
not two truths. There's just the one truth. There's the absolute truth.
Yeah, and in the absolute truth, there
Sorry,
can be
I've
anything.
gone into debate mode, but
Yeah,
it's like, what do you mean two truths?
yeah, in the absolute, there can be anything and everything, including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10,000. Not a problem. Yeah. So another way of saying it. So let me put this in practice and insight terminology for people listening. So I don't want to confuse anyone because I don't care to debate anything ever. I really have no philosophical interest in any of this stuff. It doesn't matter. I only care that somebody who wants to wake up and end their suffering does. That's the only reason I talk to you. It's the only reason I talk to videos every day, put them up on YouTube. I only care about what works. I'm a pragmatist. So I really don't have any philosophical buy-in on any of this stuff. But there is an important insight that's here for people who really have trouble with that. Like, wait a minute, how can it be absolute? And then there's relative, like it's this or this, it's this or this. Well, one thing I will point out often is just see that that's a thought. There's something that's trying to pick a side. Like, why pick a side? What if you don't have to pick a side? First of all, but that's a more superficial way of saying it. What I would rather say is, when it comes to this two truths thing, there are many really good Zen pieces of liturgy that kind of address this in various ways. Zen is a very direct pointing kind of thing. It's a very direct insight and so forth. And I really like that about it. But if I were to put it in order, it's simple. It's like when you find yourself suffering and you find yourself lost in thought and you realize all these thoughts are causing my suffering, or they seem to be, and I just feel stuck in my head. I feel stuck in thought. I'm anxious. I feel something feels off. Something just feels wrong about this world I live in that seems so thought based. That's how I was up until 24 years old. Then I had an awakening. Then I realized the absolute. And the absolute was so profound. It was so completely profound that I realized none of that was real. None of it was real. Never had been. Never could be real. And that was a felt personal experience. In fact, the sense of personal was replaced by that experience. So in a sense, the absolute is in reference to, and I think this is why Hinduism often will say, they'll just equate the absolute with self, with a capital S, because it's like what we used to perceive as self, it now contains everything. There's just no distinction anywhere. And it's a very clear, yes, this is true, far more true. And when you realize that, and again, that's just the first step. A good Zen teacher will tell you that you just open the door. Like, it's a big deal, but that's just really getting things rolling. When you experience that, it's such a relief. It's like if you've been in the desert for your whole life and you finally find water, you're going to drink a lot of water. Now, that can become dysfunctional, especially, and this is why shadow work starts coming in, right? Especially if you have a hesitation tone, if you have a dissociation tone based on existential wounds or developmental wounds that have caused you to somehow be avoidant or something, you may start using that for avoidance, and instead of like dealing with the challenging situation with a partner or your boss, or you're in an abuse cycle and just telling, oh, nothing's happening, there's no one here, there's no one to be abused, there's no abuser. Well, yeah, and yet if you're honest with yourself, you're feeling abuse or you're doing abuse or whatever it is. Like that's what I mean is, like, at some point that relative sense needs to be addressed, right? Like, sure, the absolute is absolutely what it is, and yet I can't deny the fact that I feel contracted. I can't deny the fact that I react, that I lose my temper with my kids because whatever, I feel out of control and I don't know why. I have an addiction that I'm not dealing with, right? So that's the relative, and it just comes and it rears its head. It's like you can't avoid it. So it's not really we have to decide, is it this or is it this? If you just follow this path, you'll find all the aspects of it. You can't ignore it. You can't ignore the fact that you realize the absolute. It's so completely obvious. And then you can't ignore the fact that that shadow work is coming. We could call it the relative. So it just shows itself. That's how it is. And at some point, you will actually see how they interpenetrate. So it's like by discussing it philosophically, we're trying to jump all the way to the end and go, no, they're the same thing. Form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Samsara is nirvana. That's only conceptual until you've gone through those steps and through the cascade and the pathway and the insights. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So it's really to understand this at an intellectual level that has to align with an emotional level, with a physiologic level, and an energetic level, having complete congruence. That's a hard won realization. It's not an early realization. It's nothing that no one's ever going to understand that philosophically, really. Does that make sense?
I think so. I've also got I got a bit distracted by a message down the bottom saying, Angelo received the following error. We had trouble reading recorded data.
I don't have a message anywhere. Yeah, I don't have a message. I just see at the top it says recording. Do you want to stop recording and retry it, or?
So I just stop recording and press
these
start
two?
and see what happens.
I don't.
Okay. All right. So fingers crossed we're capturing everything you're saying. So does this idea around looking at potential shadows of communities or giving intentional thought about how communities develop around this work or approach come about, make sense to you? And you mentioned one thing about historically it's mainly been patriarchal. Maybe you could say some words about what the alternative might look like, and if there are things we can do as someone who puts on events and, does a podcast and speaks to other people that are involved in organizing things around this work. I'm always curious about how to do this in a way that does, avoid unnecessary harm.
Yeah, great question. My book has a whole chapter on teachers and like how to, it's really, and I wrote that in response to what you said. There are many teachers in the past who have been abusive, who have been, pseudo cult leaders or straight up cult leaders, or just, mildly emotionally abusive to a lot of people that are in their inner circles. This stuff has been rampant in spirituality, right? And no area has missed it. Like no area has been left out of that, like Zen and Dzogchen and Hinduism and Advaita Vedanta. Like all these different traditions have had some of this. Christianity, of course, and all that. So, so I wrote this chapter, and it's essentially like, okay, look at the qualities that a teacher hopefully would have if they're going to talk about a teacher, facilitator, whatever. They're going to talk about non-duality, talk about awakening. Of course, they should be awake. Like they certainly should have insight themselves. But then there's like red flags too. Like, are they trying to get something from you? They don't need to get anything from you. It's, and I don't mean like they should never charge you anything ever, financially or something. But certainly if they're charging like exorbitant amounts of money, they're trying to get money from you, trying to get your accounts, they're trying to have sex with you. Like all these things are obviously red flags. But even some more subtle things like you, without realizing it, and this is reasonably common even in some settings where I think that the teacher's well-intentioned, they probably do transmit to some degree and people are having experiences. But it's something that unless you have a sort of thorough understanding of human psychology and or have done a lot of shadow work yourself, you can overlook it. And that is the teacher subtly just wants to be the enlightened one. And the students want to like put it on them. Like, well, I don't have to wake up as long as they're always the enlightened one, And as silly as that is, I see it frequently, right? So it's not uncommon. So you want a teacher who's going to put you on the hot seat, not be abusive or mean to you, but make sure that your teacher gives you the impression that they know it's on you and that they're not special, really. Like, they'll provide what they can and support and transmit and all that. But it's really up to you 100%. And that's a really important thing, I think, for a teacher to convey in a clear way. And they mean it, like they live that way, right? They function that way. So that's part of it, is just being clear on what is okay and what's not okay in spiritual teachers. And then some of it, in part of this chapter explains this, is your own psychology. Like the teacher may be doing a great job. They may not be enmeshed. They may not have these ulterior motives, but you do. You may be putting something on them that they can't do for you, or whatever it is, right? So there's your own psychological features that could be playing into how you might either pick a teacher that's not suited for you or enter a relationship, a teacher, sangha, or group that's really not, that in some sense is like detrimental to what you're trying to do. You know what I mean? In a sense, it could be distracting. There could be drama that you're getting entangled in, and that's a big distraction for you. I don't know what specifically, but just, it's important to know yourself as well to some degree, and your motivations. Be clear on what you're trying to do. Be clear on the fact that it's your responsibility to wake up and do this work and do the inquiries and do the shadow work, and that you will find allies. You definitely will find teachers in various forms, including just a teacher in a book like Eckhart Tolle, and maybe personal teachers and your therapist. Like, you're going to need allies, you're going to need help, but it's really on you, right? And so I think that's a huge part of it, is to make sure the community understands that, any community, right? So then it's like, well, how do we develop communities, or what's the role of community? In Buddhist terms, that would be sangha. To me, it's variable. It just depends where you're at, what the group looks like, what the function of the group is. I don't really think in terms of trying to build a community myself. Like, it doesn't register too much for me. I just think in terms of whatever person I'm talking to right now. That person, do they want to wake up? If they want to wake up, they have my attention, and let's get to work. That's how I deal with this. And that can be in front of a group in a satsang environment where I'm at a retreat, someone's on stage, and there's 300 people watching. I'm talking to that person about awakening. I'm also talking to anyone in the audience that's going through the same fixation. That's how it is for me. That's my role. Now I do have people say, hey, let's put something together for a sangha. Let's put something together so we can do a community locator, and and people can get together and do different kinds of workshops with each other or whatever. I'm all for it. Like, if that feels relevant to people, I'll support it. But I don't spend a lot of time on that kind of stuff. Like, I usually, someone volunteers to do it, and I'm like, that's fine with me. Yeah. So that's kind of my sense of it. There's specialized roles for sangha or groups, and that is like retreat. So if you're on an in-person retreat, meditating with 100 people for a week, it's a powerful process. Like, it's a powerful um, um, act to sit in silence with that many people for that long. It has a lot of implications, like to be around people, and when we're normally around people, we get into thoughts and headiness and discussion and seeking validation and all the things we usually do. Well, now we're around people and we're actually just stopping, being silent, sitting, meditating, developing a collective samadhi. That has an effect. It's powerful. So there are sort of specialized environments where sangha is really, really helpful. There are also environments where sangha can be detrimental, for sure. Like, there can be, in some groups, like competitiveness sneaking into the whole thing, or again, ulterior motives. Like, things come in, normal human stuff. So just be weary or be cautious about the kinds of groups you get yourself into, and make sure that there is a collective intention in that group for each individual to wake up to whatever degree
Yeah.
that they really want to. And as long as that's the kind of central point of the group, I think it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind as a potential way forward, I'd be curious as to your thoughts, is in the therapy world, what's evolved over whatever the last 100 years, I don't know where it started, is the recognition of a need for supervision, and which allows two things. One, the nature of shadow, by definition, is that which you can't see. It's shadowed, and so people often aren't aware of their own shadow, or by definition aren't aware of their own shadow. I think, not being a Jungian either, and so supervision just allows someone on the outside to be like, hey, I think maybe some of the dynamics that are developing between you and students or whatever, maybe you should look at that, as a friend, supervisor, not just to tell someone off, but to also support them in their role as a teacher or community leader or whatever. But also gives other people someone they can go to if they have some kind of concerns about either what's happening with the teacher or even in the community. So, as an example of one thing that I've seen at times is people might go to a workshop or an event, and they have, even if it's just temporary, like some kind of heart opening or awakening or bliss, and maybe they're less discerning for some time after that. And there might be someone else who, I'm going to use the word predatory, but I think someone is not even consciously predatory. It's not like I'm going to come along to a non-dual thing so I can, find sexual partners. And maybe they're even in a more open state where some of their sexuality is less repressed, and they're kind of looking to, and the opportunities are arising more easily in the same way, in any altered states it would happen. So again, I'm making the mistake of always giving you three questions at once, which is probably like really poor podcast technique. But you're doing really great at kind of coming back with three-pronged answers. But to summarize the question, what do you think of this idea of maybe normalizing this, like, peer support, supervision amongst non-dual teachers or something like that to catch things when they're not going as well as they could?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know of any like body of I don't know who you would give that job to, I suppose. But I do think a mature human being in any kind of leadership role should be open to feedback on the impact they're having on people, and not surround your again, this is the cult behavior. Like you surround yourself only by yes people, and you filter out the people who aren't going to say yes to you, and make sure no one says no to you. And yeah, you're gonna have a sounding board or echo chamber where you can do anything you want. And sadly, people are going to select for those groups sometimes. Some people want to be in that group. On the other hand, if you have a leader of whatever kind and they have that discernment to make sure that they have checks in place, like I personally have many close friends, many very awake people, other people who teach, other people who facilitate and stuff, and they know I would take any concerns from them about anything that's going on, of course. And I ask all the time, what's going on at retreats, how are people doing, like, mm, so I don't know what the overarching recommendation would be. But again, like people who don't have scruples, well, they're already going to self-select and go off and start a group like that anyway. I see it still happening. It still happens, and it's going to happen. It's not just in spirituality either. On the other hand, if you have a teacher who seems to be interested in you waking up, they don't seem to have ulterior motives, and that's in the sangha. There's no weirdness that people are actually waking up, and there's not a bunch of drama, and there's not a bunch of culty type behavior. You're probably in a good place. I mean, that's
Mm.
kind of how I see it. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking it doesn't have to be like a body. It could just be in the same way that you've normalized looking at shadow work, and that
Mhm.
might inspire other people. Sorry, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I've not heard any reports about any untoward behavior in you or in your community, or quite the reverse. That's why I thought it'd be interesting to speak to you about it. Um, but I could imagine maybe just seeking out someone over whom I don't really have any authority or power, and just saying,
Mhm.
hey, could you kind of be an official supervisor? We'll check in once a month, and also your email will be on the website, and if people have concerns, they can reach out. Um, and and if that was normalized in the same way, perhaps some of these things would be called out, or that could be also a red flag of like, oh well, this person, there's no process, there's no complaints procedure, there's no one to call out
Yeah.
to. There's like, what would I do if I'm seeing something that doesn't look right to me or seems to be causing harm? But these are just ideas that I'm exploring as again, someone more in London, sometimes online, bring teachers in and I organize workshops and bring people together, and would love to see it being done better than perhaps some examples we've seen in the past.
Mhm.
Yeah. Uh, you, you've got 9 more minutes, is that right?
What are we looking at here? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so uh, a a friend of mine asked me to ask you, actually, you had said something in one of your retreats around really go for this 100%. I don't know if that rings a bell for you.
Oh God, I
Because
said so
that's
many things. I have no idea when I said that or what point. No idea, or what context I said it in. Most importantly.
okay. So it's not necessarily something you say a lot that makes sense to you. Of like, oh yeah, I'd say just go for awakening 100%. Make it your main thing.
Oh,
Because her
okay.
question,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
so what I say, I don't tell people you should make this your most important priority. What I often say is something like, if this is already the most important thing for you, then take it seriously. Give it everything. Give it your effort. But you got to check in
okay,
with yourself. And if it's not your top priority, then first of all, look at what is, or just look at what your competing agendas are. Like I'm all about really checking in with what's going on with yourself, right? Like, um, maybe you feel like, well, I do want to wake up, but I also really want to start a family, and I'm at this time in my life, and I'm working toward that. I'm fine with that. Like, there's no sense in me of saying anything's better than anything else at all. And part of what makes that possible is when that whole spiritual specialness collapses. It's like, it's not special. It's remarkable what can happen with this. The unbinding process is tremendous, but it's not special. It's just what it is. So if somebody says, "Hey, this is the most important thing to me," and they mean it, and usually you wouldn't say that to me unless you mean it, that's great. You have my attention. Let's get to work, you know. But if you're like, I'm not really sure, or like, that's fine. Do what you got to do. Maybe you need to develop yourself in a certain area of life first, and then work on this. Maybe you just need to like look closely and see what's really going on. What are your competing agendas? Maybe you want three different things. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe just sorting that out will actually realign things for you. So I kind of say it like that. And I also say, if it's not the most important thing to you, that's fine too. If you resonate with coming to retreats, doing a little inquiry, meditating, watching videos here and there, but you're not like on fire with the Dharma, there's nothing wrong with that. I was like that for probably between probably 14 and 24. Like I would read the Tao Te Ching and I didn't understand a damn word. I literally would just be like, this looks like meaningless words. Like I don't get it. It's so contradictory, you know? Now I read it and it's completely obvious what it's saying. But yet there was something in me that was like, but there's got to be something here. Like I felt like there was something there, but I just didn't get it. And other times I would have little breakthroughs, like someone would say something and it would just land a different way. And I'd be like, yeah, yeah. So there were years in my life where I really sometimes had a sense of some insight, some kind of sacredness. Other times I was just like so in my head and triggered and frustrated. And so, I probably wouldn't have ever said this is the most important thing to me until I knew it was. When I knew it was, it didn't take me long to wake up, but that was just because of where I was. I suffered a lot before that. So the one thing we haven't talked about that I just want to be really clear about um, is in my experience in my experience, meaning not just Angelo, but all the people I've worked with waking up, this is really about ending your suffering. I want to be really clear about that. It's exactly what Buddhism says, but that's what it's about. It's about ending your suffering. And by suffering, I don't mean physical pain. I don't mean that you're going to age. You're going to age. I don't mean that you may get a disease, because you may. And most people get some kind of disease. And, the body's going to grow old and it's going to decay. And all those things are going to happen. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the unsatisfactoriness, the feeling that something's just off. Yeah, my relationships are fine. I got a good job. My health's okay. I just don't feel okay. I contract. I feel stuck in my head. I feel anxious. Like to me, that's suffering. That's that angst of just being alive. Like something's just not right. And it's a good thing if you perceive that directly, because in one sense, there is something that's not right. And it's just your perception, but that's the pointer, right? That's the breadcrumb. So that's what I mean by suffering is unsatisfactoriness. And the whole point of this process, in my experience, is to come to the end of that. And you can in this lifetime. I know you can. I know anyone can. I've seen it over and over and over. So I want to be clear on that. And I will also say some people get into this and they might say something like, well, for me, it's more like curiosity. And I'll say, that's great. No problem at all. And then 3 years later, they say, oh, you're right. I was suffering. I just didn't see it. It's fascinating that we can hide our own suffering from ourselves. So that's what I think this process is really about. And I also think suffering is sacred in that way, because it is the breadcrumbs that are going to lead you. Because you're not going to go through what you have to go through to wake up and do the deeper shadow work and stuff unless you're suffering. Like there's a reason you do that stuff. So suffering faced authentically and sincerely is one of the best things that can happen to you in this lifetime, if not the best. But it's not fun. But it will free you. Yeah.
Have more. This is all great, Angelo. Thank you. And I have more questions than we'll have time for today around the shadow work and discerning when is it insight time, when is it shadow work, and but maybe I can just be selfish for a moment, and hopefully it's helpful to others as well. And just to ask in the last couple of minutes. Obviously, you've only known me for 90 minutes so far, but based on my questions and what you can tell from what I'm curious about or whatever, do you have an instinct around what advice you'd give of like, okay, maybe look at this now, or you really, in terms of seeing a little bit more clearly what you're speaking to?
Sure. You want me to be direct?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you've only got 3
Okay.
minutes,
Yeah.
so you'll have to be.
I think you feel like you have a heart. Your heart is in this. Your heart is in truth. Your heart is in this subject we're talking about. You don't seem to be shying away from it at all. in any way. Um, there's a stickiness around understanding, for sure. There's a stickiness around wanting to know how this works. And I would suggest, and I think you actually even not just know that, but you even know how to work with that. Probably you know how to move past that. But if you move far enough past that, you may have a very strong fear response. Letting go of who you think you are and letting go of how you think the whole world functions and spirituality and all that is terrifying, actually, for a short time. Usually not for a long time, but that's all I can say. That's what I sense is like just go off the map. It's okay. Like you can like your knowledge doesn't disappear either, by the way. In fact, your mind gets sharper after awakening and after deeper realization is what I find. Because it's less clouded by a bunch of like self-doubt and confusion and unnecessary thoughts. It's clear and precise, I think. So you're already a very sharp dude. You're a smart guy. And you again, your heart is in this and you feel attuned to it. You feel reasonably clear, like like I feel peace coming through and all that. So I don't know anything about you, but I would assume you've done a lot of work and you've meditated a lot and done some inquiry and different things. But so I think all that's very, very aligned. And the only thing I feel is a little bit of stickiness around understanding this stuff, or understanding, having like some kind of mental paradigm, and that there's a stickiness of identity around that. Maybe that's the only thing I'm sensing. It's not a big deal, and I usually would never say something like that unless someone asks me genuinely wanting to know. But that's what I sense.
No. I'm very grateful for it. And in terms of narrative, what comes up is like, oh, if I let go of this kind of control, this narrative, maybe I'll end up being one of these terrible people who aren't doing, causing harm, and maybe aren't even aware that they're causing harm. And like
Yes,
the whole point of this is to reduce harm, but not just for myself,
yes,
ideally.
that's your
S-
heart.
yeah.
That's awesome. This conversation we're having is where I would go if I was working with you. Like if you have a teacher or whatever, take this up and talk about it because what you just said that's the psychological fear. The psychological fear is I'll become a jerk. I'll become a creepy guy. I'll become the weird teacher. I'll whatever. Now, that's one form of it. There's other forms that are very common in this exact point of departure. One is I'll go insane. Some people are terrified like I will go crazy if I move beyond these thoughts. One
Or
is
lose
I will
discernment.
not
Yeah.
what's that?
Lose discernment.
Yeah, or literally go insane. Like some people think I will
Yeah.
literally go crazy. Like
Oh,
that's
yeah,
what the
yeah.
thoughts are telling them. And
Uh,
another one, a
uh,
third one
for
is
me, it's
I
more like
will,
losing discernment. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And well, I'm just
Yeah.
saying for anybody listening. And another
Yeah.
one is commonly like I won't be able to take care of my kids. So these are the
Mm,
like your ego knows how to hit you where it hurts. And
mm.
when the gloves come off, it knows what to tell you to stop you from moving farther beyond wherever you're moving beyond. So all I can say is no one can predict the future. Maybe you will become that guy. Maybe you would anyway. Who knows, right? But I will tell you this. Um, the fact that you're concerned about that actually just tells me a lot about you. The kind of person who becomes a cult leader, they don't have those concerns. That's not what they're worried about, right? So yeah, I think you're okay, and it kind of shows that you do have care about this. You do want to do this right. You do want to be a good human being. You don't want to abuse people, of course. And if you go beyond that
Or
psychological
enable it.
fear,
Yeah.
with
Or enable it through lack of
or
discernment of
enable it
like,
or
oh, it's
anything,
all just
sure,
flowing and blah, 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 blah.
yeah, yeah. So I get that. And once you go through the psychological fear, which is the one you can form in form of a thought or a statement like you did, then usually you get to the physiologic fear. And it'll be intense and you'll feel it in your body. And then usually that you'll get through that too. And you just stay the course. Just like Papaji says, don't move. Don't move your mind. Don't start a thought in that moment. So that's the pointing I would usually give in someone who's like right there with that final fear that's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to let go here.
Great. So I wouldn't normally feel so good about ending a call with the prospect of impending terror, but I feel good about this call. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's great to make a connection with you, and yeah, if you're open to, I'll be in touch in the future. But either way, this has been really brilliant. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. You had great questions. I like it. You were challenging me, but you weren't getting like too argumentative or anything. But you were challenging. Like I like challenging questions, and I tell people you should challenge me. You should ask me the hard questions and not like sugarcoat things or whatever. And you did, which
Well,
is
I'd
great.
be very interested in your. I'll email you this thing if you get time. You watch it. It's a lecture from Shamil Chandaria. He's a neuroscientist. He's been meditating for 38 years. He's been very involved in this whole inquiry and had his own awakenings. But he really brings a very up-to-date neuroscience lens on how the mind is, like the latest understanding of how the mind is making its best guess about what's out there and how malleable that is, and how actually no one has any clue what's really going on.
Yeah.
But it can be seen through as a, effervescent arising of who knows what. And yeah, so I'll email it if you're curious to watch it and respond to it, and we can chat again perhaps.
Will do. Thanks, man.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care. And thanks to your audience for entertaining me.